Hello and welcome to Mooks and Monsters. I'm Rob Ward.
And I'm Tim Niederreiter, and this is episode 124 of the podcast.
And this episode is called Just Do It! Don't let your dreams be dreams. And we're going to open this show a little differently with a poem. This is from Shel Silverstein. All the woulda, coulda, shouldas laying in the sun, talking about the things they woulda, coulda, shoulda done. But all those woulda, coulda, shouldas all ran away and hid from one little did. That's one of my favorite poems of all time.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it's very much what we're going to talk about today. We have a lot of, as you know, creative minds, we want everything to be just right, just perfect. And with an RPG, it never will be. So instead of, using all, like, prep time is important, yes, but sometimes you just got to go in head first and just dive right in.
Yeah, and this isn't really about winging it, though that can be part of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about just accepting that you've got to take some action. Something's got to change. I actually think this is a huge factor here. In your game world, it's not going to be static. I think one of the best examples of this was actually, for in my gaming history, was when you were running that first Mafia game, and you had all these great Mafia characters, these NPCs, and of course, and like especially my character, but all of us, we kind of ran over them. We killed a lot of your characters who were really cool and iconic feeling. Especially my guy. But it was. But you were fine with that, right? This is just what happens, in a sense.
Oh yeah,
I think that's a really mature way to. Oh right, exactly. But I think that's a really mature way to go about it, because there's some GMs, and I think especially early GMs, where it's like, this character is so cool. This is kind of my character in a game about other characters, and it's more and so letting things change in your game world is kind of part of just doing it. But that's a side thing, really. Yeah, just came to mind. So the other form of just doing it is just to stop plotting and have something happen, kind of thing. Do something, it goes very much similar to, if you don't mind me saying for a second here, and get on my soapbox. It's a lot like a writer who because there's two kinds of writers, or so they say. I think everyone falls somewhere in between. But there's the people who plot their books, and there's the people who discover what's going to happen as they go. And I'm more of a discovery writer, but there's a lot of there's a lot of people that plot, and I think it can be tough to get out of that mindset when you're running a game. So that off soapbox now.
Well, it's very much this is definitely where Tim's experience as a writer really shines, because as a writer, Tim has deadlines. He has dates where this thing needs to be done by. And I think that's like the number one thing. Set a deadline for yourself. When you're creating the story, you got the location. Even if you're not entirely done, well, unless it's a one shot, you don't really need to be done yet.
Yeah.
And you have to have room to. You have to have room to breathe as well.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that useful. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no problem. Because you have to. Because your players are not going to hit every spot. They're not going to go everywhere that you want them to go. They are going to find places that they need to explore on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And that might mean not meeting this cool creature, not falling into a cool trap. And you just have to keep going with it.
Yeah, and sometimes players are going to dive really deep into something you barely even thought about, right? Like a classic example was from a game I played when I was probably 13 or 14.
Hmm.
and my brother was running it, and it was this game where it was D&D, and we got this job. We found work from this creature we met in a dungeon, so it was kind of suspicious. And originally, that was supposed to be like the main story arc, but our characters got so freaked out by this like snake monster that was trying to tell us what to do that we booked it to another town, and we gave up on that quest completely. And we booked it to a big city, and that was the rest of the game. And the city had basically been off the map. It was on the edge of the map. We ended up there, and that was the rest of the game. It was funny. It was really enjoyable, at least back then. But it was one of those things like my brother was really able to, just go with it, right? He was able to just say, okay, I guess you're not going to be there anymore. Guess we're going to throw out this whole region I prepared. I mean, I don't think every GM should do that. I mean, not immediately anyway. And we did, and there were still some repercussions for doing what we did. But it's one of those things like when you don't just throw out the whole concept of your game necessarily just because your players want to. That's not what this is about. It's more like be prepared for the unexpected. And how you do that, it's partially improvisation. It's partially just being prepared to say, okay, this is what's over there, and in a spur of the moment when that's what's happening. And it's also partially to just to move what you thought was going to happen one place to somewhere else if it works that way. Like say you had a really detailed dungeon, like say in the example I just gave, if my brother had a really detailed dungeon he really wanted us to go to, and we had never been there, well, it would make sense to move that, or even just part of it, if we'd never seen part of it, move that part of the dungeon to some other location on the map so we'd actually find it, wherever we ended up. And that's kind of the improv that the players don't even realize it's improv because they just think they won't see that.
Precisely, yeah. It really is. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
And I mean, no, you want to say something? It's fair. Feel free.
Well,
I don't want to run you over.
And these are just some tricks. Yeah, we have as game masters to keep this story going. We have these opportunities to keep moving forward and just getting this game off the ground and doing it. Because a lot of times, people are in paralysis.
Yeah.
We don't want to go forward because, things are not under total control.
Yeah. Or yeah, and that's the thing about an RPG is you can't keep the game under total control. You're not the only storyteller as the game master.
Oh yeah. And if you are worried that, your game's going to come to an end right away because I mean that's something that people should be aware of when they're creating a game.
Yeah, you don't want it just to veer off into the dust and just be over, right? Usually, unless it's like a one shot, in which case, you want it to go one session, right?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I just had to collect my thoughts there.
Yeah, no problem.
I've heard a lot of stories about people that they just ruin, like game masters saying like, oh well, this happened, and they like a game got finished in a session where it was supposed to be this epic campaign because they just went straight for the big bad. And this is where I'm gonna kind of throw in my organized crime buff hat, because after a major shakeup in the organized crime world, like I'm watching Narcos Mexico right now, and Felix Gallardo is he's pretty much got all of Mexico under control. I know for a fact he's going to go to prison because that's what happened in history. When he does, what happens to the rest of the people under him? They split up. They start warring with each other. So you have to be looking at your game world as a living, breathing thing instead of just here's a grand story.
Absolutely, that's a huge element, and I think it goes for series fiction, so that's why it's been on my mind a lot lately, actually, because I'm trying to write more books in different series. and in the same series, honestly. And I think having a, you can't keep your world encased in amber, right? If you're going to run a game there, it's going to be a little sloppier than if you write a book for writers out there, right? Running a game isn't writing a story in the same sense. I mean, you write story elements, but then no matter how professional you are, you take it and the players go somewhere else almost every time. And but a great example of just doing it is another good example from a game is that I could have really let this bog me down. I mean, but for months I was but right before we started that first 2-person session of the space opera game that we played years ago, that space opera game with the Baron and everything. Originally, I'd been building that world for that universe for quite a while, a few months, few years maybe. And then I thought, this is the coolest, right? I really want to run this game. And eventually I did run it, and we just got you and John, and we ran the game. And it was really fun. But the thing is, it was also completely different than I imagined originally, because just taking your characters and realizing, okay, this is how you fit in. This is what the game is going to be like now. I guess not totally different. It was still the same genre, still the same basic idea. But the idea, but like when you picked for example, you picked one of your cliches. This was Rhesus. So you picked your main, it's like your class basically. And you were, I don't know if economist is really the right word, but basically, robber baron.
Oh, I chose economist. That was my top. That was my top cliche.
I know, but it changed everything, because it's like, okay, so this game's gonna be a lot about money and dealing with the economics and stuff, and that really threw a wrench into kind of the idea I had for what this game was gonna be about, And actually, on another level, when John's main top cliche was fleet admiral instead of just spaceship captain, right? That changes the scale of the game again. Now, both your top cliches made it like, wow, these guys are really big players. They're huge, and that really did inform the rest of the game for the remainder of the time we played it, which is a couple of years. And I think that's kind of cool. And running with your players' characters is really a good idea too. Because you don't, especially if you're designing a game before you know what the player characters are going to be like. Well, especially in a system like Rhesus, where they could be almost anything, or mutants and masterminds. One of your characters could be an alien who's like Superman and flies into space. That changes everything.
Oh yeah.
Depending on what you let your players build for characters, or what your players build for characters in more open systems, that can be a huge difference, right? I mean, or take it down to a simpler level, or a more granular level. What if you have a game of D&D, but you only let your players play humans, and all the other creatures and races can only be NPCs? Now I think that's a legit choice for some settings, right?
Oh, sure, but absolutely.
It does change the game a lot.
Yeah.
And it makes the feel of the game very different.
And if you want to be like that, as a game master, you don't have to. I mean, I'm always a fan of like having this character creation be a separate entity than the first game, because that's just so much fucking time.
That's a huge session, yeah. If you do both at once,
it's just a fucking time suck. But otherwise, I would say definitely keep your Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of.
That's okay, dude.
It's coming back. It's coming back. Because we were talking about
character creation.
Oh, character creation. Yeah. If you have to limit your characters, that's fine. Because I remember immediately when someone asked me if they could have a helicopter, I was like, absolutely fucking not. This is the 1920s.
Yes.
Yes.
Or like, I want to be a computer hacker. 1920s. Just point at that sign again.
Yep. 1920s. There's no such thing as a fucking computer. So you could put those limitations on it, and that might help you get into that game. Keep them to a class, keep them to a species, a race. They all have to have something in common. They all have to be from. When I ran Call of Cthulhu, I created a list of potential like where your thing could be from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
because
your character could be
otherwise,
from, you mean? Like you couldn't be
yeah,
you couldn't be just
because
you couldn't be somebody from like Australia, maybe. Maybe Australia's not a great example, but you could like this character your characters can't come from too far afield, is kind of what you're saying.
exactly. Like I said, you could be like in law enforcement, you could be like some sort of like medical professional, you could be part of the circus, you could be um, like
Yeah.
local. But other than that, everything else is pretty much off the table because otherwise you're going to have to justify having a scuba diver with an acrobat.
And most games actually are going to limit you and limit the player character's creation in some way. You know, D&D, you have these 14 classes and these 6 races. That's a huge number of permutations. You can make a lot of different characters. But that's still a limitation over something like Mutants and Masterminds, where your character could be, you know, a time traveling monk from another universe or something.
Yes, it is just not. It's it you it just your goal is to run the game, and if
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep on justifying, why everyone here is being, um, just from left field, you're gonna like waste time. So you
Yes.
could definitely just put down like this is what you are. This is yeah, and just play it that way.
Right, that's a cool way to do it. I mean, like the random character generation systems. I'm a huge fan of that. You know, I have come up with ways that you can randomly generate a character for a Reese's game in different settings. I've come up with ways you can generate random, other stuff. I mean, just tables. You know, you roll a die and it picks a stat or picks an idea for you. And I think that's really cool. Yeah.
And if you're really picky, you could just create a couple of generated characters and just give them to your players to play out. And then when they get familiar or they die, you can do something else. But the object is to get the game going.
Yes. And I think that's the most important element of running an RPG is keeping things going and keeping things moving.
Mm-hmm.
Because because even though, unlike in a story where you can edit it, if you're the writer, you can go back and fix things. A game, this is why games tend to be sloppier, because the important thing is to keep moving forward. And I say sloppier, but I mean only as a story. They're perfect as games, really. But the element of imperfection comes in the storytelling comes from the fact that, sometimes your players don't want to do that. Sometimes your players succeed too easily at a hard part or fail too much at a easy part, and so no game is going to be perfect, but the results of any of your say dice rolls can be permanent. And therefore, because most games, you're not going to go back in time, right? You're not going to go, and even if you do, that'd be part of the game, and you'd go back and play more session based on this time travel element. It makes me kind of think a Groundhog Day game would be kind of fun.
Oh man, that would.
Like that movie Edge of Tomorrow. So it's like, we're gonna fight aliens, but it's also Groundhog Day. It'd be weird.
That's a mind fuck right there. That's a great idea.
How would that be for a game? It's like eventually you know everything, and you still have to keep going because you just can't. You need to solve the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I kind of want to do that now. Anyway, how funny would that be for a Call of Cthulhu game? But the fact is, if your characters are doing something you don't want, well, it's also hard because the rules of improv, right? The basic rules, like don't just put your foot down most of the time, right? Unless you absolutely have to in a game like this, because limiting your players is one thing, but if they don't know they're not supposed to do something or they can't do something, you got to find a way to ease them into that fact.
Yeah, because it really does become that.
Make a little progress.
Yeah. It becomes that thing of like railroading, because nobody likes to be in a railroad campaign, because you either like people just don't show up to the game anymore, or they just try to ruin the game.
Yeah, exactly. Just go play a video game if you want a railroad, like an old school video game. Even.
Exactly.
Most video games aren't that railroady these days, at least RPGs. So I think this is kind of the point of just doing it, though, is to just you've got to be okay with the fact that your game is going to be a little bit imperfect, and that's really what it comes down to when it comes to just running a game, having a good time. That's what makes the game good. It's not about your pristine story ideas or your characters that you created. It's not about any of that. It's about the experience you have with your players.
Precisely.
Anything
All
else you
right.
want to add about this? I don't have a whole lot more. Yeah.
No, I think we kind of hammered the point home. Like, you just gotta get up and run the game.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a Mooks and Monsters. You can find us at mentalcellapublications.com. Email us at podcast@mentalcellapublications.com. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Stagehat. Tim's at Need a Writer. You can find us. We are hosted by Lipson.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, and talk to you next week.